Commission. I'll take roll. Commissioner Lee.
Here.
Commissioner Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Gray.
Here.
I'd like to welcome Commissioner Lateef Gray to his very first meeting. And unfortunately, Vice Chair Ambrose is very much under the weather and is not able to join us today. Agenda item number 2, public comment on matters appearing or not appearing on the agenda.
Okay. Well, thank you, commissioners. My name is Ellen Lee Zhao. I am a public social worker for more than 10 years in the city. I am a union steward for the government employees. I am also the Director of Public Relations for California Civic Grand Jury Association, the San Francisco chapter. I have been a resident for San Francisco for more than 33 years. I love my city. I have been coming to you ethics commissions many times with other government employees in this room in different dates in 2016, 2017, 2018, and 2019. The last time I was here was June 28, 2019. I came before you demanding you as ethics commissioners to investigate government corruption within the public officials. Failing policies makers fail to protect public employees, tourists, and residents. Prior to June 2019, I have been reporting to you possible corruption within the public officials through election fraud. No other political parties, such as Green Party, Independent Party, Libertarian, Republican, Nonpartisan, or Constitution, minor party, Democrats only, pay to play through super PAC and matching funds for 45 years. For example, in 2018, San Francisco taxpayer paid $4.16 million for matching fund to only one party, Democratic parties only. The matching fund and super PAC is a government scam and election fraud. Matching fund is public scam to enable bad policymakers. June 2018, I was one of the candidates for San Francisco mayor, but I was not allowed to join more than 20 public debates and forums that took place in public libraries, city hall, and many public areas. And those forums and debates supported by super PAC and Democrats only. I was discriminated because I was not a Democrat. I am still not a Democrat. I am a proud Republican, conservative, Chinese American. Today, with the failing policymaker dominate City Hall, we have 21,000 homeless people dying on the street. We have 25,000 drug abusers and dealers and car break-ins every day. We have crimes that targeted minority people like me, Chinese Americans and Asian Americans in San Francisco. We have 50,000 empty apartments while we have so many people who have no housing. You are a public employee representing the government, and you sign up to represent the government as ethics commissions. I am here today to remind you that you personally sign up to do, and you are personally liable to sworn in, and you're liable for what you do for San Francisco. The United States Constitution, Article 6, Constitution right, the Supreme Clause, which states the supreme law of the land is the highest law in the United States. But San Francisco has been violating so many laws that put us, you and me, at risk. So I'm here today and ask you to evaluate the electoral officers and its process, election fraud, and bad policymakers dominate City Hall. They created a city with poop, pee, needles, crimes, and nobody is able to feel good or safe in San Francisco. Thank you. And this is my public record.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other public comment for agenda item number 2? Okay. Moving on to the consent calendar items in agenda item number 3, draft minutes for the Ethics Commission June 28, 28th, 2019 regular meeting. Number 4, proposed stipulation, decision, and order in the matter of Richard Matthews, San Francisco Ethics Complaint number 09-150331. Agenda item number 5, proposed stipulation, decision, and order in the matter of Aaron Peskin and Aaron Peskin for Supervisor 2015, San Francisco Ethics Commission Complaint number 1516-11. Agenda item number 6, proposed stipulation, decision, and order in the matter of living wage for educators, San Francisco Ethics Commission Complaint number 1718-134C. Agenda item number 7, proposed stipulation, decision, and order in the matter of Monica Chinchilla for School Board 2018, San Francisco Ethics Commission Complaint number 1819-026. And agenda item number 8, proposed stipulation, decision, and order in the matter of Thea Selby and re-elect Thea Selby for the San Francisco Community College Board 2018, San Francisco Ethics Commission Complaint number 1819-050. Call for public comment on any of these items.
Yes. The items that you had read, it's only supported by Democrats. There's no people's voice, no other political voice in San Francisco. It couldn't be said. San Francisco, it's a government controlled by no rule of law. Thank you.
Thank you. Other public comment on any of these agenda items? Otherwise, I will move to approve agenda items number 3 through 8. The second from Commissioner Lee. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. So on the non-consent items, I would like to take some items out of order. After agenda item number 9, I would like to call agenda item number 12, the discussion of the monthly staff enforcement report, and then agenda item number 10, discussion possible action on enforcement process improvements review. So we'll take those two items together, and then we'll call the policy item. Okay, so agenda item number 9, informational presentation and discussion regarding anti-corruption and accountability ordinance, the legislative implementation overview.
Thank you, Chair Chu. Commissioners, good afternoon. My name is Rachel Gage. I'm the Principal Program Manager with the Engagement and Compliance Division. Just to quickly recap, at the last monthly commission meeting held on June 28th, the Executive Director, Pelham's, announced that the Anti-Corruption and Accountability Ordinance, ACAO, specifically that all forms and resources associated with the ACAO had been launched and were made available on the Commission's website. Subsequently, Chair Chu requested a presentation on the ACAO rollout at a future Commission meeting, and today's presentation is responsive to Chair Chu's request.
Thank you.
Go ahead. The title of today's presentation is the Anti-Corruption and Accountability Ordinance, Legislative Implementation Overview. Just a bit of background, at its April 18, 2018 special meeting, the Commission approved the Anti-Corruption and Accountability Ordinance, ACAO, a comprehensive ethics ordinance developed in partnership with community stakeholders and members of the Board of Supervisors. The board and the mayor subsequently approved the ACAO on May 22nd and May 30th, respectively. ACAO added 7 new and amended 2 existing filing requirements, all of which became operative January 1st, 2019. This slide offers a summary of all of the newly implemented forms, both new and amended. Those forms that are amended actually have been flagged with asterisks. The following requirements applicable to political committees.
I'm sorry, Ms. Gage. To clarify, all of these forms are available online on the
Yes.
Ethics Commission website, so
Let me
any
back up.
members of the public would be able to navigate to any of these forms that they would need to fill out, and they could do it all online.
Absolutely. All forms were made live effective June 27th, I believe. No, I mean, all of the electronic forms. The forms were made available prior to then in paper format, and some of the forms were actually launched earlier than June 24th, but June 24th represents the date that all forms were made available.
All forms are available. Okay, thank you.
Filing requirements applicable to political committees. Form SFEC 114.5, behested contributions received by certain committees. This form is applicable to ballot measure committees and committees making independent expenditures. The triggers that would require a committee to file this form are the committee receives contributions totaling $5,000 or more in a single calendar year that were made at the behest of a city elective officer. Should the committee be required to file this form, they must disclose certain information about the officer who made the behest, as well as information about the contributions received at the behest of that officer. And this would need to be filed no later than the deadline to file the semi-annual or pre-election campaign statements that must report the contribution that makes the cumulative total of the behested contributions 5,000 or more.
And then, once it's filed online, would that be searchable by elected official, or AT&T, for example, by different vendors? You could put in a search term and then find out how much
Absolutely.
someone has contributed?
The information, as soon as it's filed, it's available in real time. Not only the filing itself, but there's information that's actually parsed out, extracted from the document, and parsed out to SF data, so that it's open to the public. And also, Tyler's not here right now, but I do want to make sure he's actually implemented some additional dashboards and is extracting information to now add to the campaign finance dashboards, and they're available on the Commission's website as well.
So then, in theory, come election time, we could do a search to see how much any given candidate has requested in behested payments to certain organizations, and we could total it.
Absolutely. The dashboards are very comprehensive, searchable. There are multiple ways to filter out information per candidate, per committee, per election cycle, per race. There are various ways that an interested party could actually review that information.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Form SFEC 124, contributions made by business entities. This form is applicable to any committee required to file campaign statements with the Ethics Commission. The conditions that would trigger this filing requirement, the committee receives contributions totaling $10,000 or more from a single business entity in a single election cycle. Should this occur, the committee must file Form SFEC 124, disclosing information about that business entity, and also disclose the name of one of the business entity's principal officers, in addition to contributions received by that business entity. And this must be filed no later than the deadline to file the semi-annual or pre-election campaign statement that must report the contribution that makes the cumulative total of contributions from that business entity $10,000 or more. Form SFEC 125, Bundled Contributions Disclosure Report. This form is applicable to committees controlled by a city elective officer or a candidate for city elective office. The conditions for this filing, a committee receives contributions totaling $5,000 or more that have been bundled by a single individual. Should this occur, should a committee receive contributions from a bundler that total $5,000 or more, the committee must file Form SFEC 125 disclosing information about the bundler and the contributions bundled by that individual. And the filing is due no later than the deadline to file the semi-annual or pre-election campaign statements that must report the contribution that makes the cumulative total bundled by that individual $5,000 or more. This next section includes the forms that are applicable to city officers and city departments. And I'm going to do something a bit different here. Form SFEC 126F2. I want to show that there's a relationship between this filing and the one that follows this. And so I'm kind of build a scenario that helps establish that. I think it's going to kind of help understand the relationship to the two filing requirements. This form is applicable to city departments. The conditions: contracting department receives a proposal for a contract that has a value of $100,000 or more in a fiscal year, and the contract will require the approval of a city elective officer. Okay. So scenario would be for this, a city department puts out an RFP, a request for qualifications, and valued at, let's say, $1 million over a 5-year term, or $200,000 per fiscal year. The contracting department receives proposals from several contractors in response to the RFP. Due to the value of the contract, it will require the approval of the mayor. Because the amount of the contract exceeds $100,000 in a fiscal year and the contract requires the approval of the mayor, the department must file Form 126F2 within 30 days of receipt of the proposals, disclosing information about the contract and the names of the contractors and subcontractors listed as part of the submitted proposals. And the filing is due within 30 days of receipt of the qualifying proposal. Form SFEC 126F4, borrowing from that same scenario I used for the 126F2, that contract has now been awarded and is now, and all the negotiations have ceased, and that contract is now at the mayor's desk and requires the mayor's approval. Using that same fact pattern, because the contract is valued at $1 million and requires the approval of an elected official, the elective officer approving the contract now has a filing requirement as well. The elected official, within 5 days of approving the contract, the elected official must file Form SFEC 126F4 disclosing information about the contract, the contractor, and listing any members of the contractor's board of directors, principal officers, and any subcontractors listed in the bid or contract. And this filing is due within 5 days of approving the qualifying contract.
So, Ms. Gage, I have a question about this, because I would imagine there's a huge volume of contracts and RFPs that flow through the city at any given time. What communication have we done with stakeholders and first of all, the contracting departments and the elected officials to notify them of this requirement, because the timelines are quite tight.
Absolutely.
In some cases. So I want to make sure that they have the filing requirements and that they're aware of them so that they would be able to comply in a timely way.
Sure. I do want to emphasize that 126F4 is not actually a new filing requirement. It's been in place for quite some time. ACAO only amended that, actually extending the thresholds. So although we still did some targeted outreach for that form, letting departments know that it was available and just reminding departments of their filing requirement, that is not new. So the amount of interest that form has generated is not what it's not what it has been for the other forms. The F2, however, 126F2 is new, and it essentially extends that prohibition that this is actually and has a relationship with the contributions prohibition. It has now extended that onto essentially prior to ACAO if it was only applied to those contracts after they were approved. It's now applies to a contractor once they submit a proposal. So at that point in time, they're essentially negotiating with the city.
Right, and and they may not be selected, right?
Absolutely.
But it's only, but if they're in the pool.
Correct.
Commissioner Lee?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The question I have for the Form 126F2, since it's new, it's been implemented since January. So have you received any information between January to now to see how that has worked out?
Absolutely. I actually will say that this form probably has received the most interest and generated the most calls for engagement and compliance. Specifically, they've been very general in nature, more about the application of the filing requirement, just getting clarification on the specifics. But in most, I think, like I said, nothing that's been anything that's been challenging for us to answer and assist with. We did a very comprehensive memo that went out to departments and city officials announcing that this form was available online now to file electronically and all the supporting resources. The regulations that were adopted, I think July 30th, those also help implement 126F2.
Did that answer your question, Commissioner Lee? Yeah. Okay.
I have a question.
Thank you.
Yeah, Commissioner Gray.
Maybe you answered this, but what is the difference between this version of the 126F4 and the previous version?
Sure. ACAO just extended the threshold. So prior to ACAO, the contract value was $50,000. It's now $100,000. Prior to ACAO, the time frame at which the prohibition was applied to the contractors was 6 months. It's now 12 months. Form SFEC 3209B, notification of recusal. This form is applicable to members of City Board or Commission. Conditions: the member recuses himself or herself from a matter being considered due to a potential financial conflict of interest. And the form is due within 15 days after the date on which the recusal occurred. So just to add a little bit more, and I'm actually going to demo this form at the conclusion of the PowerPoint portion of this presentation, just to kind of give you an idea of the filing experience. But I just also want to, there are several steps that are required in order to recuse, for a member of a board or commission to recuse themselves. That is not a new law associated with ACO, just the filing requirement is new.
So now with these reports, we'll have a record.
Absolutely.
Of how many times someone has recused and
Yes.
for which matters, and that can now be searched and it's available to the public.
Yes, and actually, as of yesterday, there had already been 19 filed
Really?
this year.
Wow.
Yes.
Do we know, is there a multiple, like a repeat, a frequent flyer? Recused?
I have noticed a repeat of, in some cases, yes.
Thank you.
Sure. Form SFEC 3610B, behested payments reporting by city officers. So I'm going to offer a similar scenario like I did with the 126 forms. With this form and the forms that follow this, there are two forms that follow this in the same series, are distant relatives. So I'm going to kind of, I think, start with the general information about the form and then give a bit of a scenario, and then I will build on that on the next two filings. This form is applicable to city elective officers and members of a board or commission who file a statement of economic interest. The condition: an officer directly or indirectly requests or solicits a payment totaling $1,000 or more from an interested party that is made to a third party for legislative, governmental, or charitable purposes. So a scenario in this, for this form, which would require me to, a commissioner or an elected officer to file this form, would be a commissioner who serves on the planning commission, ask a developer to make a donation to the Red Cross. The developer makes a donation in the amount of $1,000 to the Red Cross at the behest of the commissioner. 2 months later, that developer applies for a building permit, and the permit must be approved by that planning commission that that officer serves. Because the amount of the contribution was $1,000 and occurred within 12 months, prior to the commencement of the proceeding, the commissioner who behested the donation must file Form 3610B within 30 days of the date the officer knew or should have known the developer became an interested party. And just to back up, once that developer had a proceeding in front of the planning commission, that developer became an interested party. And so building on that scenario, Form SFEC 3620, changing a few of the facts, that developer, who is also the donor in this situation, who made the behested payment, instead of $1,000, the payment was $10,000, which triggers a filing requirement for the developer, in this case, who is the donor. The donor is required to file Form SFEC 3620 with the Ethics Commission within 30 days of the payment that makes the total $10,000 or more in a calendar year, and must disclose on that filing information about the officer who made the behest and certain information about the payments made. Additionally, if the donor is an interested party in a proceeding involving the city officer that behested the payment, the donor must also disclose the proceedings, describe the outcome sought, and report any contacts the donor had with that city officer who behested the payment.
So, Ms. Gage, let me ask you a question. If I sit on the Ethics Commission, and if I were to do some fundraising for my son's school, and asked them to contribute to the school fund for art and music, and one of the other families in the community was made a contribution, under what circumstances would I then need to file? If they had then they became an interested party and came before the Ethics Commission or any body of the city?
In front of you, in front of the Ethics Commission.
In front of the Ethics Commission.
Correct.
Okay.
That you are in any decision, any proceeding that you're involved in, the behesting officer is involved in, is what it would be qualifying in this situation.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions?
I have
Commissioner Gray.
one. Would that also trigger a recusal on the part of the officer?
Only if the officer had a financial conflict of interest or potential financial conflict of interest with the developer and or the, actually in this case, it would be the third party, the Red Cross in this situation, in this fact pattern, the recipient of the donation. This is the final form in this series, Form SFEC 3630, major behested payments filing by recipients.
Excuse me, can I go?
Oh, yes, Commissioner Lee.
Can I go back? So if the planning commissioner also sits on the Red Cross board, that's a financial interest, right? Conflict of interest.
Interesting. So the planning commission as a body
Yeah, but the
has a
planning
financial interest in
commissioner-
the Red Cross? I'm sorry, the commissioner.
Yeah, if the planning commissioner also sits on the Red Cross board, and the donation was made in the behalf of the planning commissioner to go to the Red Cross, so that.
So that she, okay, I
or
understand.
The recusal, right?
So the commissioner actually serves on both the planning commission and the Red Cross,
Right.
a board of the Red Cross or
Right.
something to that extent. Would it trigger a recusal?
A conflict of interest. I thought there was a conflict.
or a conflict of interest. I don't know if that would constitute a financial interest, but I'm not quite sure. I'm going to defer
I'll
to
jump in.
Pat Ford.
I think it would be relevant as to whether or not that person was getting paid by the Red
Right.
Cross. If they
Yeah,
were
the
serving in an
off-
unpaid
yeah, the
capacity,
financial interest, yeah.
likely no financial interest.
Form SFEC 3630. This is, again, the final form in that series, and this filing requirement is applicable to the recipients of behested payments. The difference here, in addition to the filer being the recipient in this case, is that the qualifying threshold is $100,000 or more in a calendar year. So in this scenario, I'm going to change things up again. Instead of there being one donor, the developer, let's say that officer behested payments from multiple donors, multiple developers. And the total amount the cumulative total was $100,000. That would trigger a filing requirement, that was made to the Red Cross. All of those payments were made to the Red Cross. So you have one officer, multiple donors, one recipient. That would trigger a filing requirement for the recipient of those donations. They would be required to he or she, or the business would be required to file Form SFEC 3630, disclosing information about the behested officer and the contributions received at that officer's behest. The first filing would be required within 30 days of the payment that makes the cumulative total $100,000 or more. There's a second filing requirement for the recipient in this situation. Between 12 and 13 months following the date the total equaled $100,000 or more, they have to file the same form again, disclosing how the funds were spent. In addition, if that recipient became an interested party within the 12 months, within that 12-month time frame, they'll have to disclose also information about the proceedings, outcomes sought, and so forth.
And then how would the recipients of the behested payments know that they have this filing obligation?
Great question. The donor of the behested payments there's a notification requirement for the donor. At the time that the payments are received, they're supposed to notify the recipients that the payments were made at the behest of, and also name the officer who behested the payment.
And have we seen any of these forms filed at all?
No, the 3620 and 3630, we have not had any filings yet. And these two forms were actually launched, I think these were in February and March. We prioritized the launching of the forms and made sure we made the forms available that would have a more immediate filing requirement, made those available early on. The last of the forms, the forms that are relevant to political committees, those were the last of the forms that we completed. We knew that the earliest that anyone would need to file those would be 7/31/2019 of this year.
Yeah.
This is a summary of the rollout, just with key milestones. Again, as of June 27th, all ACO-related electronic forms and resources were deployed and made available on the Ethics Commission's website. On July 12th, a notice was disseminated to all candidates for city elective office and political committees announcing the provisions and filing requirements relevant to campaigns. We also included 126F2 and 126F4 in their notice because they were related to campaign financing activities. So we wanted to make sure that we mentioned those. On July 19th, a notice disseminated to all city elective officers, board and commissioners, and department heads announcing the provisions and filing requirements relevant to city officers and departments participating in contracting activities was sent out. And July 30th, regulations implementing ACAO became operative and made available on the Ethics Commission's website, and notice was sent to the interested parties list that same day.
And then, Ms. Gage, are there any plans, or have we reached out to more broadly to members of the public or to the press, for example? I know that last year in the very busy election season, Mr. Ford did kind of tutorials with members of the press to walk them through the dashboard so that they could look at the different filings and how many candidates were receiving public financing, because I think that with a data-rich set, particularly around recusals and behested payments, it could be of great interest to the public as well as to reporters who would be following different races. Do we have any plans to?
I mean, I think that's a great idea. Subsequent to the rollout, we have the June 27th rollout. We have not done anything or targeted the public in any situation, at least not out of engagement and compliance. I'm not sure of any plans to do so, but we could definitely have a conversation about that perhaps after today.
That would be great, because I think that making it widely known that these tools are available to the public and to the press, I think would be a good thing.
Thank you. This slide, ACAO operational implementation cycle, this is just really an overview of the processes that as an organization that we had in place in order to implement ACAO. As you're aware, it was a major project, and so we wanted to have, I think we had to be a little bit more strategic in our planning and coordination in order to implement all of these forms and filing requirements as quickly as possible. And so, interesting enough, in the beginning, we didn't really have a formal process for implementing new forms. I think this kind of evolved organically. And I would say midway through, it was relatively seamless. And so this just gives an illustration of what that process looked like. And I can quickly go over the different phases if you're interested in hearing more information. Sure. So the initial phase is the analysis and discussion. So what we would do is really assemble kind of an informal task force, just for lack of a better term, to describe the number of divisions within Ethics Commission that were involved in this roundtable discussion. We had representatives from policy, engagement and compliance, electronic disclosure, and data analysis, EDDA, enforcement and legal affairs, and executive management. And this was a very comprehensive discussion where we discussed the law, its intent, the disclosure requirements, and we planned and devised kind of a project timeline to get through or conduct each phase of this cycle. From that meeting, we produced a fact sheet. Typically, this would be a document, an informative document that engagement and compliance, along with the policy division, would collaborate on. And it would contain all of the information, highlight key aspects of the legislation, filing requirements, triggers, deadlines, identify stakeholders, and so forth. It was kind of just something that we referred to really, for all the subsequent materials, we looked to that for guidance. The next phase was the form development. This is where we developed a paper form and circulated it to the team for review and input just until it was finalized. DocuSign conversion and testing. This was when the paper form was now in the hands of the EDA team, and it was converted. There was conversion from paper to electronic format, and then designing user interfaces and configured the system. After that, there was testing conducted by members or representatives from different divisions within the Ethics Commission.
Excuse me, Ms. Gage, I have a question about the form development. So over time, as the forms become more widely used and deployed, and as we have learnings from what the layout is and the format and the fields, is it possible to go back and update or tweak these forms to be able to more efficiently capture the information that's required?
Oh, absolutely.
Or are we locked in?
Absolutely. And we actually rely heavily on filers actually filing the forms and seeing if there are any changes that we need to make. We identify what those changes are, and usually engagement and compliance and the edit team will work together to make those adjustments as needed.
And is there anywhere on the website that seeks feedback from the filers in terms of what their experience is or what feedback they might have?
So they're not shy. They call and they email us. I can attest to that. So we do get feedback and things, but I think for the most part, with the exception of maybe just needing clarification on what's required in a specific field, the e-filing process is relatively user-friendly. And we have also, and Commissioner Ambrose is not here today, but I wanted to make sure that she knew that at the May 29th meeting, I believe it was, commission meeting, she had mentioned that it would be helpful to have a PDF read-only version of every form available on the website, and we have done that. And that will be our practice moving forward as well.
Oh, that's great. Yes, I believe Commissioner Ambrose is watching on TV at home. So.
Great. The next phase in the cycle is to automate the data extraction and publishing. And this is where the information, the programming takes place, again, in the hands of our EDA team, where they program the extraction, the automation of the extraction, and the parsing out to the dashboards and also to the open data platforms. And so that is all automated so that when somebody files, that whole process happens and it's made available in real time. And that is every filing that we have that's in place. The next phase, compose web content. The websites, and actually I'm going to demonstrate a little later in the presentation, just kind of how the website, the web pages that were established to support the forms is actually also the gateway to a filer. This is where you would initiate a filing from. And again, I'll show the commission that short in a few minutes, just to kind of give you an idea of what that looks like. And so this is where we compose the web content that will support the form. It will include instructions, summarize the actual law itself, how to file, when to file, who it's applicable to, just all of the information that the filer will need at the time that they are filing. And last but definitely not least is the rollout. And this is where we publish the form, the web content, all of the resources onto the website, the public dashboards, we have the guides and resources as necessary, execute the outreach plan that we've devised at that initial analysis and discussion meeting, and provide ongoing filer support and oversight. And we're in that phase right now.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Okay, so that concludes the PowerPoint portion of my presentation. I did want to quickly, before I actually get into the filing experience, just kind of show you the website. I'll navigate to a couple of the forums and show you how the construction, the construction of the forums and how a filer would actually initiate a filing.
Great. And then if it's possible, Ms. Gage, at the end, could you show us, could you pull up, and is it possible to see from, from an administrator view, a list of the filings of the, for example, just recusals, where you mentioned that there were several filings today, so we could see that?
I'm not sure if I can actually log on to SharePoint from this computer, since this is not actually my computer and we're on a different server, so I'm not really sure.
Okay.
I'm happy to demonstrate that at the next commission meeting if that. Okay. Oh, sure. Oh, that's right. Actually, I had planned to do that. I can actually show you how the data, after it's parsed out on DataSF, you can actually see the PDF version of that as well.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
fantastic.
Thank you, Gayatri. So this is the page that's been constructed for SFEC Form 114.5, behest contributions received by certain committees. Again, we usually have a just a brief summary of the law when it was enacted and so forth. We offer key definitions that apply to the form itself, like what is the behested payment, and this, for the purposes of this filing, what is a ballot measure committee or a committee making independent expenditures. So these subheadings in blue are specifically definitions. Filings by committees, this is where we include the information about how to file, when to file, and who's required to file, and the filing deadlines and so forth. And
Sorry, Ms. Gish, could you go back up to the top? So if I'm new to this as a committee member, how would I know that I would need to file the behested payment? Because it's identified as Form 114.5, but I may not know that that's the form I need to file because it's a behested contribution. So how would I?
By
how would
certain
I
committees?
Yeah.
So obviously the outreach is a huge component here. We notify committees, active committees, of their filing requirements. Also, all of the resources and filing requirements that apply to committees, whether it be candidate control committees, independent expenditure committees, major donors, are all listed. Actually, we have a page, a parent page, that houses all of the filing requirements and at what those triggers are to file. And that's really, to some extent, the gateway to the parent page that is specific for any particular filing.
So if you're an independent expenditure committee, click here and then you'll be brought up to that page. Okay, thank you.
Absolutely, sure, and I can actually show you that if you. Here is where I'm on the committees page right now under compliance. And if I scroll down, we have these subheadings here: establish a committee, training and committee treasurers, reporting requirements, disclaimer requirements, filing schedules, restrictions. Under reporting requirements, all of the requirements required by a committee are listed here. And usually in order of priority, there's no numerical order here. And 114, the new forms that are applicable to committees, actually 114.5 wouldn't be here, but let me scroll. Oh, yes, it is.
There it is.
Sorry. The forms that apply to committees are actually listed here and under local requirements. Sorry, here's the local requirements. So above this are all the state requirements, and then we get into the local, and it has everything listed here. So we give, these are just filing deadlines that apply to the signature gathering period for ballot measure committees. If you scroll down, it goes into pre-election statements, expenditure dates, and then here are the new forms that were added as a result of ACAO. And this just offers a brief synopsis, really, what the trigger is for having to file this. And then this link here goes right into that parent page I was just in.
Great.
And again, this also serves as a gateway to actually file the form. This is actually where a filer would initiate that form, and I'm actually going to scroll down. But before I do so, I do want to show you at the bottom of each, like I mentioned earlier, the bottom of each form, we've included a PDF of the form, a preview of the. So if a filer wants to see what information do I need to have with me when I have to file this form, what information should I be collecting when I receive contributions and so forth, they can actually review all the form fields here and the requirements.
But the only way to file is electronically. So they wouldn't be able to download this PDF and fill it out by hand and then bring it into the office to file. Okay.
No, we would reject that if someone tried to do that. But we do have a watermark that says for previewing purposes only. And in the instructions, we made sure to emphasize the fact that they must e-file or electronically file. And so, as I mentioned, this webpage also serves as a gateway to file a form, in this case 114.5. So if you scroll down to the bottom, how to file, it kind of gives you just a brief summary as to, who can file, if somebody can file on your behalf. We do have some forms that office staff can file on behalf of an officer and so forth. So we will usually include those instructions here. And this is the entrance to the actual filing. Behested contribution received. Okay, so here's where the filer would enter their name, first and last, and their email address. This is the person that's initiating the form, would enter it in this section here. the person, and they would also enter the person who would be signing the form. So the person who actually has signature authority, in this case, it would probably be a treasurer, would be their name and email address would be here. I do want to mention that, we have, I guess, the initiator and the signer can be the same person. It doesn't necessarily have to be to a person, but that the person initiating has to enter their information twice in this case. And actually, I'm going to quickly demonstrate, again, the filer experience for you. I'm going to be conducting this test in the test environment just because, again, the information is parsed out to the public portals immediately. So if I were to file in the live site, that information would actually, we don't want that to happen. So I'm going to be in a test environment. So the entry point is going to look a bit different than it would for a filer. But I just actually wanted to show you what it would look like for a filer in this situation. And again, I'm going to demo the 3.209 notification of recusal. So the 3209 recusal would apply to city officers. It would be listed under conflict of interest. And there are two forms here, the advanced written determination and the notification of recusal. And again, this offers a summary of the law and the, I guess, the triggers that would inform a board member or member of a commission or commissioner of their requirements, their filing requirements. And this is the link that would take them to the actual web page that supports the form. And so they would initiate their filing from this form here at the bottom, similarly to the previous version. In this case, however, a commissioner has to file on behalf of themselves. So you'll just see one section here to enter a name and email address. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go to the test site. Oh, I think my number keys are off. There we go. And so just to kind of give you a scenario, I'm a commissioner. 10 days ago, I recused myself due to a potential conflict of interest. I'm now required to notify the Ethics Commission within 15 days of that recusal. And so I'm sitting down to file now. I entered my name and email address and start form. And so this is an access code. So this is a verification process that's in place to ensure that the person filing is actually the person who should be filing. Mm-hmm. And so when I enter my email address, what happens is an email notice gets sent to that email address with that validation code. So it's a security measure in place.
Is this unique to the Ethics Commission, or is this for all forms that are being filed with the city electronically?
It's available in the DocuSign system. Whether or not other departments are using it, I know in previous departments I've worked in, it has not been in place, although we were using DocuSign for certain approval processes. So I'm going to just copy this verification code and add that here, so that I can resume filing. So this is just a disclaimer that's on all DocuSign documents. Usually if you're not a DocuSign, if you don't have a DocuSign account, an active DocuSign account, DocuSign doesn't recognize the email address I just used because it's not really my email address. And so it's a user, and I use for just testing purposes. It's not linked to my DocuSign account, so I have to click this little disclaimer. But commissioners, more than likely, if you were filing this form, you would not have this to actually check this little disclaimer box here. But you would see the same screen and have to click continue in order to enable the form. And so I will start. And the form fields that are highlighted in red are required fields. Anything not in red are optional. In this case, this is going to be the original filing. If I were to be filing an amendment right now, then I would have to, you would see these fields here in red. They now become required fields because I have to reference the original filing date, the date of the original filing that this is associated with, and the reason for the amendment. But in this case, I'm just going to file an original. And here in section 2, name of member of the Board or Commission, this is where I would enter my name. And the name of the Board or Commission. I'm picking on the Planning Commission today. Work number, and work email. I'm just gonna. Recusal information is required in section 3. The date of the recusal occurred again 10 days ago, so that was August 6th. And I believe this is date validated, so you're going to want to enter the date. As if you see here, it gives you just a little tooltip how the date should be entered. If I were to enter this incorrectly, the date incorrectly in an incorrect format, it would just tell me I need to do it again. Agenda item.
Will it give you an error message if it's not within the time frame that you need to file the?
No, we don't have that in place. Yeah, that would be, I don't know, I don't think that DocuSign has that sophistication. So again, when somebody files, the Engagement and Compliance Division is reviewing filings as they come in, and we are contacting and notifying filers if they are out of compliance.
Okay.
Agenda item number, let's just say 9. A brief description of the matter. The proceeding itself, I can just say, let's see, RG developer, permit application, I can't type today. Vote. Check this box if the matter concerns the making of a contract. So this would be a situation is if this was for the purposes of contracting with the city or city department in the jurisdiction of the city and county of San Francisco, I would have to indicate that here. In this case, it's not. It's a permit matter. Explain the financial interest causing the recusal. In this case, I will just say I have a 20% ownership in RG development. And again, in this situation, it's a one-step process. The member who recuses himself or herself is also the filer and the signer. And so that can all be done in one step. Excuse me, one more thing before I get to the signing. It's also required that the agenda be attached here. And so that's a required field. So you click here, upload a file. I've actually saved today's agenda here to be able to, and done. And so now that it looks like it's disabled, that means there's a document attached to the form. And I just click here to sign. it will adopt my signature. I can choose another signature if I don't like the style. Adopt and sign, and hit finish. That immediately, and I have the option here now to download the signed document, print it. You can also, if you're on your home computer, you can actually upload it to a cloud account or save it to your computer as a PDF. There are a lot of options here. I'm just going to close. But in addition to that, I've also received via email certification of completion. And if there were two parties involved in this filing experience, there was the initiator and a signer, both would get the certificate of completion at the end of the transaction. And again, if this was in the live environment, that information would be immediately extracted, parsed out to the live data sets, and the Engagement and Compliance Division would also receive a notification that a form had been filed. Specifically, Form 3209 had been filed.
So will the commission or the department also get a copy that this form has been filed?
No, not the commission. The filing responsibility is on the commissioner
Right,
who made the
but-
recusal.
Right, but I'm just thinking that would there be some accountability that, okay, this person has recused him or herself, and they filed the form, so should the actual department, the commission, also be notified that?
Well, they would be aware of the actual recusal because it occurred, and there are steps involved in that it occurred prior to the filing requirement. The filing requirement itself is a requirement imposed by the Ethics Commission, and so I don't know that that would be something that they would be looking to ensure that it's taken, because the responsibility is actually on the commissioner who made the recusal. Sure. But there is, again, in the public environment, a department they wouldn't actually receive a notice from this process, but if they wanted to check to ensure that it happened, that they can do that, or implement another process where the commissioner had to bring a copy. But I think that would be a protocol that would have to be enforced at the commission level, the commission that the commissioner belonged to, the Planning Commission in this case.
Well, just like the Form 700, we all know we have to file it, but sometimes it's nice to have some reminders that, hey, did you file?
That they've done it. And actually, that's a great segue into I want to show you, actually, if a member of the public or if the commissioner who just filed that wanted to actually see, again, what I just filed is not going to be on what I'm going to show you right now, but I want to just show you how that is actually laid out and how the information is made available to the public. So again, it's open. It's going to be available in SF data. I think it's our data SF, which used to be called open data, but they've changed the formal name. So if you just had a member of the public that doesn't know that they can navigate from the commission's website, but is familiar with SF data, they can access this information right from SF data website. They don't have to navigate through our website, but we wanted to make it relatively easy and provide a gateway from the commission's website. So I'm going to go to disclosures, and in this case, actually, oh, thank you. Sorry, conflict of interest doesn't fall under my jurisdiction, so sorry. Disclosures, so I would navigate, so we have it kind of itemized here, sorry, the drop-down's not quite. Campaign finance, city officers, lobbyists, campaign consultants, major developers, permit consultants, and so all the disclosures relevant to these parties would be under the corresponding field. In this case, it applies to city officers, notification of recusal. And at the bottom, this is, again, it just, yes, there we go. Yeah, sure, thank you. This, again, just, it highlights the the requirements and the law and so forth again on this page. But at the bottom here, you'll see a dashboard. So let's say that the filing that I just filed, let's say,
So this is live right now.
this is
the-
live,
the-
absolutely. There was one specifically that I saw the other day that I wanted to show, but these would, accessing it from this particular table would actually reveal the PDF of the filing. But I did want to make sure to show you what that looks like in real time. Here we go. So. So here is a form that was filed on June 24th. And it's, I don't want to, let's see. I just want to show you the form is completed, and at the end of it is the attached agenda. And a member of the public could just review it here if they wanted to print it out and so forth. They're able to do so. But I also wanted to show you how the information is parsed out to the to Data SF. And you can actually access that website right from here as well.
So if there is a matter that is continued from meeting to meeting, for example, at the Planning Commission, they take it up in August, but then they don't decide and they hear it again in September, would the commissioner need to file again in September, like an amendment, or is a single filing sufficient to cover that matter, no matter how long it takes to be decided?
I don't have the answer to that, actually. I would assume that it would be each time the recusal took place, but I'm not, I'd have to do that research and get back to the commission on that.
Yeah, it'd most likely be every meeting.
Every meeting? Okay. Thank you.
So now I've entered Data SF, and it took, accessing it from that page, took me right to the recusal notifications filings on Data SF, or Data SF. And so that same filing that I just showed, I just want to quickly just show you what it looks like here. Here we go. Sorry, that's the PDF. But it is available on Data SF. And I don't believe that we actually have dashboards, because this really wouldn't work in a dashboard format, this particular filing. But if it was a campaign finance form that had a contribution associated with it and so forth, it would also be available on the commission's dashboards. Okay, and that concludes my presentation.
Any other questions for Ms. Gage? Well, thank you for this. This was very illuminating, and a tremendous amount of work clearly has gone into the development of the forms and the workflow and creating a user experience that is streamlined and kind of contemporary in feel. And I think it's just utterly fantastic that this data is available not just to the Ethics Commission staff and commissioners, but to the public as well in a searchable and easy to navigate format. So thank you for that. Well done.
Thank you so much.
Chair Chu, if I may just add a brief
Yes, of
comment on
course.
it. Thank you for your comments, as well as the commission and public for the ability to present this information today. As I think you can see, there's a lot of information from the law that was enacted. I do want to take a moment to acknowledge the amount of team effort that went into getting us this far. I think everybody on staff who had a hand in this process was very excited to be able to see Rachel presenting today because of the technology behind it and the thought what that went into it. And I would also just particularly acknowledge Rachel's contribution to that effort. Just as a reminder, Rachel joined the commission in late February. And her responsibilities in the campaign finance area. So she has taken on a tremendous effort shepherding this process, and a great success to the contribution of getting it this far. Two other things that you'll see as we go through this, a lot of the questions that you might have had on your minds today are things that we will be looking to develop further as we do more outreach to departments and other officials so that they know how to work these forms and that they find it easy. And at the bottom of every web page that Rachel showed us, there is a green box that says provide feedback. So we really will be monitoring that very closely so that we can get feedback about the real-world experience of users to see how we can continuously improve this process. But again, thank you for your time today and focus, because it's a very exciting time for us to have gotten this far. So thank you.
Commissioner Lee.
This is great presentation, by the way. Great job. I noticed that even though the website is in different languages, but some of the materials are not made available in other languages. But I would suggest that for the fact sheet, be made in different languages, because that would be very
The
important.
PDF that's made available?
The fact sheet that you would be producing.
Oh, okay, so that's an internal document that we actually don't publish, but we could potentially think about maybe translating the web content and maybe the PDF version of the form.
Or maybe you can make a publicly available fact sheet, because there's so much information. If people can just get a one-page fact sheet, just to get them aware of what's happening with the new law in different languages, especially in the Chinese and Spanish language, that would be very helpful.
That's a great point, and we'll be sure to have those discussions.
Thank you for that. That was a really important point, to make sure that the information and tools are accessible to everyone in the community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Now we'll move to agenda item number 12 and 10. We'll take those out of order. I'm sorry, we need to do, yes, I'm sorry. Agenda item number 9, public comment. Any public comment on this item? Okay, no public comment. Agenda item number 12, discussion of monthly staff enforcement report, including an update on various programmatic and operational highlights of the enforcement program's activities since the last monthly meeting. Mr. Pierce, I'd like to ask you to, as you go through this, just bear in mind to kind of level set all of us in terms of where we are on enforcement activities, and use this as a background and framing item to tee up the discussion in agenda item number 10.
Sure. Thank you, Chair Chu and Commissioners. I will also, I think, have an opportunity to tee up the discussion around item 10, given some of the statistics that we've reported there. But you'll see that in this month's enforcement report in item 12, we've provided some additional data, given that we made it through the end of the fiscal year and have not had a meeting since we turned over into the new fiscal year. We provided for you at the top of page 2 some of the metrics that we keep track of as a division there. And for comparison, we've reported them both in terms of the fiscal year that just concluded, as well as the prior fiscal year. Some of these metrics you've not seen before. On the monthly enforcement report, we typically report on the number of matters in preliminary review and under investigation, as well as the average number of months that each of those matters might be. But here we've provided a wider snapshot of the things that the division has kept track of for the last, I would guess, 3 years. So you can see that comparing the 2 fiscal years, we got twice as many complaints in fiscal year 18 as we got in 19. I think two reasons for that. One would be that the mayoral election of June of 2018 took place in fiscal year 18. And we actually saw that between March and June of 2018, the division received 89 complaints just during that 4-month window leading up to the election there, or leading up to and including the election, which accounted for more than twice the complaints of that fiscal year. For comparison, between August and November of 2018, in which we had another election, we got only 41 complaints. So the public and others were substantially invested in the mayoral election in June of 2018. A second reason for the distinction in complaint numbers would be something that you may have noticed in item 10, which is a process improvement that the Enforcement Division has adopted, which draws on the distinction that the charter makes between formal and informal complaints, a distinction that the enforcement regulations reinforce. which is to assign to the enforcement director discretion to consider informal complaints. The charter requires that we consider formal complaints, but offers discretion to consider informal complaints. One of the changes to process that we've adopted is that if on the face of the complaint, it's immediately obvious to the enforcement director and to investigators that the commission lacks jurisdiction, rather than taking that in and logging it as a complaint and assigning it to an investigator and turning it through the ordinary preliminary review machinery, I, as the enforcement director, will consult with the complainant, advise them about the scope of our jurisdiction, and if I can, direct them to some other entity who might be able to handle their complaint. So you'll see that in fiscal year 18, we had 34 complaints for which we lacked jurisdiction. Those we had actually logged. So that 34 is a subset of the 163. In fiscal year 19, the roughly 30 that we handled through this consultation and no further action process are in addition to the 83. And then a couple of other things to note would be that in each of the fiscal years, we dismissed or referred approximately 2/3 of the complaints that we received and opened approximately 1/3 of those. And then finally, as to resolutions, we had fewer stipulations in fiscal year 19, but larger penalties overall. But we did also resolve more matters in fiscal year 19 than we had in fiscal year 18-22 as compared to 15. One reason for that is that the regulations that this commission adopted, I think in January of 2018, and which became effective in March of last year, provide that the commission can close in the interest of justice an open investigation, meaning that we can decide irrespective of the evidence, irrespective of potential liability in that matter, that there are overriding reasons why the commission should no longer invest resources in that particular matter. So I think if you look at the numbers there, in fiscal year 19, we saw a 60% increase in the number of times that we utilized that option. And the reason is likely that the option came into existence only in the final quarter of fiscal year 18. If you go down to the statistics that we traditionally report in the monthly enforcement report, you can see, again, that we have an increased number of complaints that are awaiting preliminary review. The time that it takes us to review those complaints is somewhat down from our last reporting in June, but significantly up from our last reporting in July of 2018. And one reason for that may be, again, that these numbers are averages, but considering the number of complaints that would have come in June of 2018, the bulk of those awaiting staff's review at that time were effectively brand new. So that would be one reason, but potentially not all of the reasons why there's a distinction in the amount of time that it now takes staff to move through these reports. It may be that we had 4 investigators at that time as well, but I can't remember with 100% accuracy. And then finally, looking at the number of investigations open, we've reported for August that there are a full 95 investigations on this docket for a staff of 3 investigators. So every investigator has assigned to him roughly 30 investigations. A couple of them remain mine from the time that I was an investigator before I occupied the role as director. Given the commission's unanimous decision today to approve the proposed stipulations, this number will actually shift to 90. And once we close those particular matters, we should expect to see the average age of those investigations come down. A couple of those that were on the agenda for today were some of the older ones. But as we turn in a minute to item 10, I would ask you to hold in your minds the size of the investigative docket at 90 or 95 and the amount of time overall that it takes staff, which includes, for most matters, not just the investigators, but also the executive director, the enforcement director and the executive director, and in some instances, the commission itself. But if you contemplate overall, from complaint receipt to resolution 7 and 16, we're looking at nearly 2 years on average from receipt of a complaint to resolution of a matter, whether that's by stipulation or closure or a determination that the evidence suggests an absence of liability. And then finally, I would direct you to the numbers that we report each month in relation to the Bureau of Delinquent Revenues. The Fines Collection Officer continues to complete her review of delinquent late fees based on her calculations. She has managed to sweep up about $34,000 in previously unpaid fees at this point since her initial efforts beginning in February or March of this year. And if you look at the table that provides updates about the status of matters before the Bureau, you'll see that there are an additional 4 matters that we have referred there on the basis of delinquent filers who did not or could not respond to the fines collection officer. I would note that of those 4, one of the entities listed there has already negotiated a payment plan with the Bureau. The others apparently remain non-responsive. And finally, an update on the Lynette Sweet matter. You'll recall that this matter is actually in litigation in Superior Court, which the city and county brought previously. That litigation was stayed as a result of a federal bankruptcy filing that Ms. Sweet made. That bankruptcy filing has been dismissed, as we discussed last time. Dismissed but not closed. I don't know whether Judge Smith could enlighten us on what it means for a federal court to dismiss a matter without having closed it.
I avoided bankruptcy cases. I could during my years on the bench.
So the Superior Court judge was interested to hear from the parties in August what the status of that federal bankruptcy proceeding might be. The Superior Court judge has once again postponed that hearing, that status hearing, which is now set for February of 2020. I learned this just today from the tax attorney over at the Bureau. That tax attorney and I have been in pretty close contact. We have been communicating with Ms. Sweet, and we have communicated to her that the commission would agree to a settlement of $20,000, which represents the amount of public funds for which she could not account. So effectively, $20,000 is the minimum to which we would agree, because that's the amount of damages that the city and county suffered as a result of her particular campaign finance misconduct, which was a failure to account for how that money was spent. And at my last communication with the tax attorney, Ms. Sweet has made a proposal to pay that $20,000 through a payment plan, which would be longer than the commission would allow if this were a settlement negotiated with the executive director. But because it is instead a settlement negotiated through litigation with the Bureau of Delinquent Revenue, we're happy to allow that, because it does not render the commission itself effectively the lending agent in this case. But Ms. Sweet has agreed to that, and I can provide further details at a future meeting, although nothing is yet written down.
Well, that's great news, because this has been pending for quite a while, and it is a significant amount. But if we can get to $20,000 and a reasonable payment plan, I think that's a terrific outcome. So good luck with that. The question I had is the matters of with Chris Jackson. I think these have been on this report since I joined the Ethics Commission. Is there, I think we talked last time about directing either the Bureau of Delinquent Revenues or an alternative to the Bureau to try and locate Mr. Jackson, or to send it to a collections agency. Is that something that we could do? Because we're coming up now on 6 years since, that's actually, we passed the 6-year anniversary of when the referral was made for the collection of this amount.
I don't know how much time the Bureau actually invests in trying to locate him, which is to say, I don't know if this is a heavy resource constraint in comparison to what they might get out of it. But I'm happy to follow up with them and even permit them to cut and run here or assign it to a collections agency as they did with Isabel or Bono. Yeah, okay, I'm happy to do that.
And then do we have a payment plan policy? I know that there are some matters that had payment plans and others did not, and obviously the Lynette Suite is out of our control from a commission standpoint, but I see that the SF Latino Democratic Club is on a payment plan. I thought at one point we were not doing payment plans, and now I believe we are. And we can talk about this in agenda item number 10 as well, but what's the current play?
Well, my own understanding of that is that the revisions to the enforcement regulations communicated newly a preference against payment plans. The executive director retains discretion to engage in a payment plan, but she would need to be convinced of the need of that. And as the regulations are written, she would agree to a payment plan of not longer than 6 months. Again, my reading of the regulations is that they apply in instances where the executive director is herself negotiating that settlement with a respondent, and it comes before the commission for its consideration. This is a different posture. This regards an unpaid late fee, effectively an unpaid debt that has been reassigned to another agency whose job it is to collect those debts. And so it is not a negotiated settlement directly with the commission, with the executive director. It's possible that the tax attorneys would have been happy to apply the 6-month limitation, but our view is that that is not necessary because one reason to refer to the Bureau is for the city and county to recover what they can. And so if the Bureau sees fit to negotiate other approaches, then we're happy to permit them to do that. If there are not other questions on item 12, I'll turn to item 10.
I think we need to take public comment on agenda item.
Commissioner Smith, did you have a?
I had a couple of questions or comments on item 10. First of all, I want to compliment you on your new procedures, especially.
Sorry, Commissioner Smith, I think we were going to take comment
yeah,
on
okay.
12.
On 12 first.
Oh, 12,
Questions on
okay.
12?
Okay.
Not important, but, so for this gentleman, Chris Jackson, it sounds intuitive, but did he have 2 separate violations, and is that what this is about?
He did. I think the ID number refers there to, well, actually, I think the ID number is a number that the Bureau assigns to it and not that the Ethics Commission has assigned to it. But the answer is yes, 2 separate matters.
Any other questions from commissioners? Call for public comment on agenda item number 10. Any public comment? Oh, I'm sorry, on agenda item number 12. Okay. No public comment. Okay. We'll now move to agenda item number 10, discussion and possible action on enforcement process improvements review.
Thank you, Chair Chu and Commissioners. So item 10, we're pleased to bring this to you today. This has been in development for some time, and we're glad that each of you could join for this discussion because we covet your feedback, your guidance, your direction on the particular proposals that we're bringing for you today. Just as a reminder, item 10 comes before you essentially at the request of Chair Chu, who at the May Commission meeting requested that staff prepare a presentation about information regarding the existing caseload and certain proposals that staff might bring about how to prioritize the Commission's enforcement resources. So in presenting item 10 to you, I'd like to highlight just 3 particular things before we open it up to questions or guidance from the Commission, though I would also invite you to interrupt me at any time that you might wish to. But the 3 things that I want to highlight include remarks about the existing caseload and basically picking up again from item 12, effectively how we got where we are today. And the second thing I'd like to highlight is the discretionary factors that staff are proposing to adopt that we would apply to the existing docket and to complaints as they come in, and welcome your direction as to whether those are the right factors that you think we should be applying, and if so, receive your guidance on how we should go about applying them. And the third thing I'd like to highlight for you is our readiness to engage in a process to revise the fixed penalty policy, and again, to receive any direction that you might have for us to do so. So turning to the first thing that I wish to highlight, in figures 1 and 2, we sought to respond to your request, Chair Chu, that we would provide information about the existing docket. Figure 2 gets more granular than figure 1 and provides some information of the variety in terms of categories that you, Chair Chu, have suggested previously in terms of trying as a commission to distinguish between broad categories of matters. And those broad categories that you had suggested previously are administrative and substantive. I think if we examine these categories, we find that even digging in with a little bit more granularity, it can, in most instances, be hard to know what the type or scope of public harm might be in a particular matter. So if we look there at figure 2, you'll see that we had 5 cases. And again, these numbers are based on the open investigative docket that existed at the time of the May meeting, which was the snapshot that we utilized to produce this analysis. But we had 5 cases at that time related to contribution limits, and we had 17 which concerned the failure to file certain disclosures or to disclose contributions or expenditures properly. And I think one challenge that we find is that although we might contemplate that a violation of the contribution limit is a substantive violation and a violation of the disclosure or record-keeping requirements constitute an administrative violation, you could imagine that if in one matter somebody inadvertently violates the contribution limit, say by $100, but in the other matter a committee fails to account for 80% of its expenditures, you would agree that in that comparison, the administrative violation creates a greater threat of public harm than the substantive violation. And it's because of wrestling with these distinctions that we would like to contemplate discretionary factors as opposed to a different approach to setting priorities, which might be to assign greater care to certain kinds of violations as opposed to others. So we think that using a discretionary framework is the more suitable way to go. It's also the case, just to close that point, that we certainly acknowledge the feedback that we've received from the Commission about maybe the disproportionate number of disclaimer settlements that we bring before the Commission. One reason for that is that those are pursued through the fixed penalty policy, and they require relatively little investigation and far fewer resources than other matters. But we could, at the same time, envision a disclaimer case which, like the record-keeping case, creates a greater threat of public harm. Certain disclaimer cases can be, for example, dark money cases. Committees may fail to disclose who their top donors are, or they may fail to disclose that the committee is candidate controlled, or they may fail to disclose that the advertisement was an independent expenditure, and those kinds of things that appear in disclaimers can matter very much to the public in terms of understanding that an advertisement is one kind instead of another. If you look at a regulation that a public commenter attached to his public comment with respect to how the FPPC handles disclaimer violations through its streamlined process, then you'll see that there are particular characteristics that would actually disqualify a disclaimer case from the benefit of the streamlined process. And some of those circumstances include situations that create confusion for the public about who paid for the advertisement and what sort of an advertisement it actually was. We understand that a lot of the interest in advancing this item today going back again to item 12, turns on the amount of time that it takes for the division to move through.
I'm sorry, Mr. Pierce, could we
Yes.
pause for a moment?
Yeah.
I'd actually like to solicit the input from my fellow commissioners on the point you just made about a discretionary framework versus a focus on specific types of cases. So what I hear you saying is that providing staff with the discretion to determine which cases, because a disclaimer case could really go to the heart and the integrity of our public financing system, for example, or our election system, and that it could rise to the level of something that would be all hands on deck. Let's make sure we investigate that. But I'd love to hear from my fellow commissioners your thoughts on that, because you're right. Over the past, in my time on the commission, we've seen a lot of the font size or disclaimer cases, and they are easier to dispose of. I just think it's important for us to be mindful of our limited resources, finite resources, and again, that 90-plus matter caseload, and how do we best deploy your team against that to have the best results possible, and what are our priorities, in that context, and that is this the right framework for us to be thinking about. I think for my own part, the discretionary piece is really important because it's not. I don't think that it's a good outcome for us to say cases of XYZ type are less important than others, right? Because depending on the fact pattern, they could all be very important, and they could all go to the heart of the integrity of our system and trust in the process. But I would really like to hear from my fellow commissioners on that, if you agree, if this is, because this is kind of a fork in the road, right? Where if we go down one path versus the other, it's hard to do both, or.
And I confess that I had not given a great deal of thought before you raised this question, but it seems to me anytime you start going from a bright line to a discretionary rule, there's always the chance of slippery slopes and different people's viewpoints making a big difference. At first blush, it's hard for me to imagine, for example, the size of the font ever amounting to a huge substantive issue. On the other hand, could it? I don't know. So I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm addressing your question or what it is you're worried about. I have not been troubled so far by what I've seen on the discretionary aspect, and am happy with what discretionary decisions I've seen by the staff, certainly on these stipulations and things. I've yet to see, not that I have not been on the commission very long, but I certainly have not seen any cause to be concerned about any of the stipulations that I've seen so far, which has enhanced my respect and ability to rely on the staff at this point. But I do understand the point you're making and think it's something we should keep watching.
I have a question. On the
Commissioner
discretionary,
Gray. Mhm.
sorry, on the discretionary aspect, do you guys look at intent? Because just as an example, we went through, in preparation for today's meeting, we had 5 or 6 stipulations, and for me, one stood out more than the rest. And the reason it stood out was because, as far as I was concerned, the intent, right? So do you guys look at intent when you figure like, well, this is discretionary, we can deal with this one rather easily because, reviewing all the materials, there's no intent. Whereas in this other case, there's clear intent, and maybe we should focus on this one a little more in depth, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. We certainly do look at intent. I would note that intent is a factual question, so we may not be able to evaluate at the outset that a respondent committed a violation willfully. So if we were to try to utilize intent as a factor to determine that we want to pursue one case instead of another. There's a slight chicken and egg problem, but if there were reasons to believe that the violation may have been willful, that we then later had to substantiate through investigation, that would certainly be a reason to contemplate it. I would locate intent, for example, among the factor for severity. If a respondent commits a willful violation, it is a more severe violation. It is, in fact, a criminal violation. Any violation committed with intent becomes a misdemeanor, although obviously that doesn't fall to us to prosecute. Likely, we could also assign intent to the second discretionary factor, which would be the impact of the decision, because if the commission could substantiate that the respondent had behaved willfully, then under the existing penalty factors provided in the enforcement regulations, we would seek a higher penalty because intent is an aggravating factor. And presumably the public has a heightened interest in the commission's bringing to resolution matters for which respondents have behaved intentionally and willfully.
I'd like to address that because I think that raises a very important issue and does, in a sense, go to the I think the comment I was making is intent is a factual decision, and so if what you're trying to do is cut down on procedural time and make your enforcement more efficient, whatever, adding intent as a major component of it, I think, is going to do exactly the opposite, which is going to slow down your investigations and cause more. I'm not quite sure what the appellate issues then are, but that you then get into that whole area. So, and I don't know where that line.
Yeah, I may provide one clarification, which is that the discretionary factors that we have proposed here regard which of the complaints staff wish to pursue. They say less about how we pursue those complaints. So the object before us now is to decide, okay, given the limited resources that staff have, given the number of complaints that come in or the number of investigations that are already on the docket, should we be making harder decisions at the outset? So how did we get here? One way that we got here was that for at least the last couple of years, our ambition was to lay a foundation in the enforcement division. We intended to adopt clearer and more reasonable regulations and to implement them in the most practical way. And at the same time, we intended to effectively take whatever came in, to work our way through all of the alleged misconduct that we inherited from prior staff, as well as to contemplate whatever came in under our own watch in order to increase fairness, predictability, public trust in the process. But I think what we are discovering today is that although that effort to lay that foundation has yielded certain benefits, it has also come with certain costs. And so what we're asking ourselves is, if we are to depart from a process by which we look at, we open all meritorious complaints, and we investigate all meritorious complaints in roughly the order in which we receive them, how would we depart from that process? What is the most sensible way of making hard decisions about which investigations the commission wants us to conduct? So talking again about forks in the road, if discretionary factors is a way to do that, another fork would be, how do we apply those discretionary factors? Excuse me, there are options. So to be more specific, we could say staff intends to apply these discretionary factors at the outset. We get a complaint, we evaluate the severity, the impact, the probability that we'll be able to prove it up. And if something falls too far down on the ladder, we don't open it even though it's meritorious. And so we have fewer matters on the docket. We could, in addition, look at the existing docket and decide, applying these factors, considering the 90 matters that are still open, which of them, again, fall too too far to the bottom of the ladder in terms of the factors that we wish to apply here. Let's clear out some of the chaff and free ourselves up to pursue the ones that we think matter the most. That would be one approach to this, is to whittle down the size of the docket on the basis of these factors. A second approach would be different. The second approach would be to say, we will continue to open all meritorious complaints and to place them on the investigative docket. What we will then do is apply the discretionary factors in determining how to assign resources to the complaints that are on the docket. So we would take the 90 that we have right now, and we wouldn't close out any of them. We would instead assign resources to the most significant ones on the basis of analysis that staff would make together in office. One of the considerations that I would ask you to make as a commission in directing us between the options that might be available to us is that if we take the second approach, we continue to open all meritorious complaints, but we intentionally allow some of those complaints to lie fallow, is that you must anticipate that the average age of investigations on the docket will continue to go up because we are intentionally opening investigations knowing that we may not investigate them. And we are intentionally assigning to the docket matters that may expire under the statute of limitations. So one result of that would be that the statistics that we report on a monthly basis would become less meaningful or possibly misleading without a sufficient amount of explanation about why those numbers are changing. I'm happy to receive guidance about whether either of those options makes sense, or I can continue with other remarks.
It seems to me that maybe there's a sort of a crossing of the two. For example, I think your idea about getting rid of lack of jurisdiction cases immediately makes great sense. There's no point in dwelling on something. Lack of jurisdiction, it seems to me, is fairly bright line. You either have it or you don't. It really doesn't call for a great deal of discretion. So getting rid of those, it seems to me, highly efficient is a way of clearing out cases, and your numbers are showing that. And then perhaps, after you do that, then you take what's left, and I don't know if there's a de minimis amount that provides response to the interest of justice to say, given you've got 3 investigators and you've got this many complaints, is it in the interest of justice to take one of your investigators and spend time on a matter that might result in a $100 fine? And maybe it doesn't. I don't know if that's an appropriate thing for you to consider, being sort of the newbie, almost the newbie on the block. But it seems to me that maybe some combination of those two is appropriate. And, obviously I'm looking at the way a court might look at it to kind of do that interest of justice analysis. But is there anything that would prevent you from doing that? In other words, having your once you get rid of the no jurisdiction and the obvious ones, then to separate cases in which it's pretty clear that there's no merit to the ones that there may be merit, and working down that way. I don't know.
I think there is nothing to prevent us from doing that, and as probably
There's nothing you said, or
I don't see that there is.
Okay.
No, there is nothing to prevent us from doing that. I think one of this may be jumping ahead to the last couple of pages of the report, but one of the things that I think about with this process is making sure that we're putting the appropriate resources.
Yes.
Proportionally to the kind of case
course.
there. And as Jeff points out, there could well be disclaimer cases that by vast majority are sort of the smaller, maybe more routine, easily resolvable cases, which we really are trying to speak to a new process that can help streamline that in the normal course of things. But that it's really important to think about how we apply the appropriate resources by thinking about not necessarily the assumption that we have to eliminate cases, but that we're going to streamline our approach to them so that it simplifies it enough in a way that it makes it, standard and predictable for folks who might be in that pipeline. That also then frees up investigative resources to really focus on some of these other bigger cases that I think we all know we haven't been able to get to as directly as we would like to. So I think that's kind of how I see it in terms of the application of resources. I think, to your point, I see it as sort of a hybrid approach, and we certainly do want to feel comfortable that the Commission is comfortable with the approach that we're taking generally for sorting through all of these cases. We also feel the need to want to make sure we're dealing with the most severe cases, and also this isn't just about receiving cases, it's also about initiating cases and looking at the data that we have and having our own periscopes up to know where we need to spend some attention. So I think that kind of jumps to the process that we're looking at implementing, but it is very important to hear your feedback about, sort of what you've seen so far, because we will continue to be looking at how we report on this most effectively. I think Jeff's point is a good one that, as our processes change, how we ensure you all have appropriate oversight and the public has some transparency appropriately into this process, that will also change. So I think, this won't be the end of the conversation by any stretch, but it is important to kind of lay the groundwork that you're all comfortable with the approaches that the staff's been thinking about, because we want to make sure there's confidence in the process and that we're confidently moving forward to implement some changes that we do think will be really constructive to the program.
And I would agree with Commissioner Smith's comments about getting rid of cases at the outset that we don't have jurisdiction over, because there's no need to open a case that we can't pursue.
Yeah.
And then second is, I guess we're calling it a hybrid approach, but I think that applying it to the existing caseload and making some decisions, because as time passes, to your point, if we open all meritorious cases, I think the downside risk that you point out is that memories will fade, documents will go missing, people will leave, and we inherited a caseload from 2010, 2011. Now it's going to be 2020 next year, and the information is only going to be more difficult to extract as part of as an investigation goes on. So I think that deploying our finite resources against the critical cases, the ones that based on the application of your experience and your discretion, that really go to the heart of the integrity of our system and at the following the money and getting at some bad conduct, I think would be a higher and better use of our time and resources, and I think get to better outcomes than having a really bloated docket with cases that actually don't go anywhere, right? Otherwise.
I appreciate that, and I'm sympathetic to that view as well. A couple of points. One would be to clarify that we never open investigations for which we lack jurisdiction because we don't have the power to do that, but we do handle them in a more streamlined way than we used to. A second point would be that as commissioners, you don't strictly need to take action on this item today. If you are comfortable, as you have expressed, with the way that staff might apply its discretion, for example, to decide under the existing regulatory framework that we might dismiss or close matters in the interest of justice, then you might consider the factors that we've described here as an explanation for the kinds of things that we now consider and will continue to consider as we make those determinations which the regulations provide. You could, at the same time, provide us more guidance about how you want us to apply those factors under the existing regulatory framework, which would be what kinds of matters do you believe go to the heart of the public trust? So you could, for example, give us guidance under the severity of the alleged violation. You could give to us a list of the kinds of matters that you want us to prioritize. Obviously, we wouldn't make those resource allocation decisions based only on the kind of matter for the reasons that I described before, but in concert with a consideration about the impact of that decision, the likelihood that we could substantiate it. That would be a way that you could provide guidance to the division in how we apply our discretion. And then the last thing I will say, to piggyback on what Executive Director Pelham said, is that we are prepared to expand the existing fixed penalty policy. The Commission adopted that policy in 2013. As far as we understand it, the Commission did not engage in a public process. when it adopted that policy, it sets out that 5 specific kinds of violations can be, not necessarily will be, but can be handled pursuant to that fixed penalty policy. Each of those kinds of violations arises in the campaign finance context. This jurisdiction is not the only jurisdiction to provide for a streamlined process. If you had an opportunity to read public comment, you know that the FPPC does as well. And the FPPC's management of streamlined cases is much broader than our own. We would intend to do a handful of things at the direction of the Commission. We would intend to expand that policy to include violations, additional violations within the campaign finance context, but also beyond that context. So they may be paperwork kinds of things, but they may also be disclosure kinds of violations, but they may also be conduct violations that we could handle through fixed penalty. And then secondly, at your direction, we would intend to engage in a public process to do that. So we would, I think, bring to commissioners a draft proposal, get your feedback on that proposal, take it out and share it with interested persons, gain the feedback of interested persons, make revisions based on your feedback, their feedback, bring to you a revised proposal which you could either adopt or, again, amend. But that process, I think, would better reflect the way that the FPPC has contemplated its streamlined penalty process. It would invite the regulated community to the table on this process for the first time. And as one of the public commenters, Jesse Minardi, points out, it would give the Commission an occasion not only to expand the number and kinds of matters that we handle through fixed penalty, but we could at the same time revisit the penalties that we assign there to evaluate, is the existing penalty structure fair? Is it just? Is it proportional? Is it like or unlike what other jurisdictions are doing? And as the executive director pointed out, if we can adopt such a policy and begin to implement it, then we should discover that we free up investigative resources to do the kinds of things that are improper for a streamlined administrative program. And so you, as a result of that process, you may actually get more settlements that are simple because they're easy to accomplish. And additionally, you may get more settlements that are complex because we have the resources to do it. So I think the ask that I would make of the Commission today would be to give us, if you wish to, some guidance about how we apply the discretionary factors under the existing regulatory framework, which is that we can dismiss or close matters in the interest of justice, and direct us to initiate the process to expand the fixed penalty policy.
In your view, and I was going to mention Mr. Minardi's comments about the comparison to the FPPC as far as the amount of the fixed penalties as well as the scope. And maybe this is an unfair question, do you consider the FPPC schedules and approaches to be rational and reasonable and something that would offer significant or good, valuable guidance? There seemed to be, I'm sorry, there just seemed to be a significant difference in some of the numbers you'd put on some penalties versus what the FPPC. And again, I'm simply relying on Mr. Minardi's email. That's all the information.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I think if you were to poll the regulated community, they would insist that the FPPC's schedule is the only, I can't remember what terms you used, rational and reasonable maybe, approach to penalizing the kinds of misconduct that are set out there. My own view, but this is open to revision through the process, is that when the FPPC adopted those schedules, they had to contemplate that their jurisdiction includes all of California, meaning jurisdictions not just like San Francisco and Los Angeles, which have their own ethics commissions, but also very small towns that have, very less significant need of fundraising or less significant opportunity for fundraising. Granted, one way that the FPPC accounts for that distinction is that their schedule assigns a percentage to the amount of activity, for example, reported in a committee's disclosures. That's one approach. My own view at this point, again, open to revision, is that 1% of the committee's activity does not provide significant punitive or deterrent value. So I would intend that in San Francisco, also considering the amount of money available and utilized in elections here, that we would pursue a significantly different schedule. What that schedule might be, I can't say at this point.
But that your schedule might be worth revisiting at least.
Yeah, we're
Both
certainly willing to.
Scope and amount.
Yeah, we're certainly willing to revisit it. And I think one significant thing about the FPPC's regulations is that they provide certain circumstances by which their enforcement division can decide that a particular respondent is ineligible for that schedule, ineligible for the streamlined process. And so they don't get the benefit of the 1%, the 1% modifier. They instead get pumped through the ordinary settlement process where the penalties might be larger. And if we were to undertake a revision of the existing fixed penalty policy, we would ask that the commission approve our ability to do that, because the existing policy says that staff is bound by that policy until changed by the commission. I mean, our own view has been that there are situations in which we could exclude someone from that policy because we think the policy envisions scenarios that don't require investigation. And so we have, in fact, taken certain matters beyond the limits of that policy, but we would like to see that more explicit in a revision.
Commissioner Lee.
Thank you. I agree with what my fellow commissioners have said. I think that during the time I'm here, the staff's work has given me no doubt that, if given discretionary power, you would stray from anything that the commission had intended your department to do. I think for the investigation unit, the two driving principle has always been the public trust and transparency. So as long as it's guided by those two, whatever actions you take, then the public will understand. And at the same time, when you look at the enforcement efforts, it's largely served to deter future ill activities. And sometimes when people look at these cases that's gone on for 5, 6, 10 years and with nothing happening, it doesn't give the public much trust. So I think that it's really important to look at the cases you take. And the second thing is, there are other cases that come to you that may not fit into the clearly defined areas that we would like to support. Maybe those are innocent cases that may expose some deficiencies that we should look at so that we can look at policies to close the loopholes. So they may not fit into the really, very neat boxes for intent or what have you, but those are the things that I trust you would bring to us that, hey, this could be an innocent thing like font in an internet thing, that it's something that we need to really look at for future policy discussions. So I do think that as long as you continue to operate under those principles, and as long as whatever we do, we make sure that there's transparency, there's public trust, then I think that we should really support your efforts, because with the limited resources and with, all the cases coming through, we're going to be, we just don't want to be stuck with, 5 years from now looking at these cases like, what happened to this case? Still on the docket. That doesn't look good. So I would suggest, hey, if we cannot deal with it, don't even bother to put it up there, because it's going to drag down your data. When the public look at the data, say, why is the commission taking 3 years to open the file? People don't don't have much trust in us that way. So I do support the efforts, and I think that, as the commission said, nothing that's come before this commission has given me doubt that you will not do a diligent review of all the cases.
So I would echo Commissioner Lee and Commissioner Smith's thoughts, and from a fixed penalty process, I think it would be wonderful if there would be a possibility that late filings, for example, there's a timestamp. You know, could it become almost like a parking ticket? You get the parking ticket. There's you can go to court and fight it, but we could send a letter and then and say that the fine needs to be paid by X date, so that it won't require a lot of investigation. For example. And then my second question, and I think this would become part of the ask to you to explore as part of the expanding the fixed penalty program, and getting input from stakeholders in the public, but the FPPC uses warning letters, and whether or not this is something that the Commission could explore using. I know that we have a confidentiality provision, so we'd have to work closely with Deputy City Attorney Shen to understand what the limitations are around the disclosure of the investigative details. But I would like to ask you and your team to come forward with some recommendations with regard to the use of warning letters, if might at the next meeting or the next time we take this up.
Yeah, we'll be glad to. Thank you.
Is there more guidance that you would need from us, Mr. Pierce, on the factors, the discretionary factors that you've listed on page 7, or on the types of cases that you've listed out, at least the current caseload that you have in Figure 2? I mean, for me, I think that it's those kinds of cases that go to the integrity of our system. So Commissioner Smith mentioned font size. Font size, it could be something, extremely problematic, but, incompatible activities like nepotism or illegal coordination between a candidate and an independent expenditure committee, or using the position, elected position, or, a city office for personal gain. I think those types of investigations and matters really go to what Commissioner Lee was talking about, is like the trust in the institution. So for me, those categories, whether, how severe those violations are, the timing of it, and also just, the probabilities, like, can this be proven, would all, be weighed in the calculus of applying your discretion. But I think for me, those are the ones that, at the top of my head, are the more critical ones.
Yeah, I appreciate the feedback. I think staff has heard you on how you might weigh the severity or the impact and what the other factors are. So I think at this time, we may not need additional guidance on those. I would just remind you that under the regulations, anytime staff dismisses a complaint or closes an investigation, we have to provide you a monthly summary detailing what complaints we dismissed and why, and detailing what complaints we closed and why. So on the basis of those summaries, if at any point you discover that we have a disagreement about how to apply our discretion, then we can have further conversation to clarify what you would prefer us to do.
Ask my fellow commissioners if there are any other types of cases that come to mind that we'd like to highlight, or other factors, I guess, would be the better way to approach it, to focus on.
I think we're going to have a presentation on whistleblower, because that's an area that I really want to know how the commission and the staff has jurisdiction over.
Are you talking about retaliation against whistleblowers?
Yeah.
You'd like a presentation on that?
Yes, because that seems to be an area that, the general public is saying that, hey, you need to protect the whistleblower, but, who's going to protect them?
Sure.
And how? Yeah.
Yeah, I did a presentation about the jurisdiction that we have and what a retaliation investigation might look like, how to prove up a case.
Union representatives to come and talk about their experience with working with the whistleblower employees who are facing retaliation.
Sorry, repeat that last part. People from where to come?
The employees union, they were, was this a commission or someone else?
I know that we had asked for DHR to come to present on to present on the investigation of the secondary employment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That will be next month. I'm not recalling anything specifically on whistleblowers. I think but we could ask Mr. Pierce to come back and do just an overview of the whistleblower cases that the Ethics Commission has jurisdiction over and how those could be pursued. I think as I think about case prioritization factors, I don't know if you want to include this in there or if it's already rolled into one of them that you have already, but I think one of the things to consider, and I believe that you already do, is whether or not another city agency has conducted an investigation. So, for example, some cases have already been investigated by the Department of Human Resources or the city attorney and or the district attorney. And so after one, two, or three, or multiple agencies have already investigated a matter, is it? I would ask that you and your team use your discretion to say, do we really need to go through and do it a fourth time, right? Or could we reasonably rely on the findings of these multiple investigations from different city agencies?
Yeah, sure. Thank you.
Okay. Well, this I think is a important discussion to have, and it's the start of an ongoing dialogue. So I would ask you, Mr. Pierce, to come back either at the next meeting or the October meeting with a proposal or a framework of around the fixed penalties and a plan, like how to engage the public. And I would like to participate in those public interested persons meetings just to hear what stakeholders, and particularly the regulated community, have to say about the reasonableness and the rational basis for our penalties. And I think that what would be helpful for me, and I hope for my fellow commissioners, would be to actually have some data. You alluded to the size of the campaigns that are run here in San Francisco, and I think that the mayor's race last year was multiple millions. So I think that if we can have a little perspective around how much money is being spent in supervisorial campaigns, the mayoral campaigns, and the penalties that are being asked, and like what is 1%? What is that worth? I think that could be very helpful for us.
Certainly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Public comment on agenda item number 10? No, okay. Well, I'm going to call a 10-minute recess. We've been going at it for 2 hours, so I'd like everyone to come back at 2:24. Yes.
SF Gov TV, San Francisco Government Television.
Okay, the Ethics Commission is back in session, so we are going to go to agenda item number 11, discussion and possible action on monthly staff policy report, including the policy prioritization plan. Mr. Ford.
Thank you, Chair Chu, Commissioners. I'm Pat Ford, Senior Policy Analyst. For the benefit of our newest commissioner, this is the monthly report that I bring to the Commission, and about once a quarter, it additionally contains the policy prioritization plan. So it's kind of a two-part thing this month, and you'll see that roughly 4 times a year. The monthly updates will talk about the projects that are on the policy prioritization plan, which are kind of the big ticket items in terms of policy work, usually legislation, program review type things. But the monthly update also contains information about other kinds of projects. If you look at page 3, I included a pie chart here that gives a kind of rough breakdown of what the policy division does. And I say division, right now it's just me. Typically it's 2 people, but for now it's 1. But you can see that policy projects are about 1/3 of where the bandwidth is devoted. Otherwise, there's a lot of general advice to staff and to members of the regulated community, also other departments about the meaning of our laws, and program support to other members on staff about administering our programs, as well as legislative affairs and media relations, making up kind of smaller slices of the pie. So this monthly report gives updates on all kinds of items that fall in those different slices, but they're generally the kind of the bigger ones that are either taking up a particularly large amount of time or are just noteworthy things I think you should be aware of. And then the policy prioritization plan, that is basically staff's proposed way of proceeding for the next quarter with which projects to move forward with, and those are numbered. And then later on, there's kind of a bucket of other projects that are not currently underway, but could be at a future time. So the quarterly discussion of the plan is basically to ratify or change staff's proposal as to which projects to do on an ongoing basis, but then also to discuss the bucket. To either add projects that you're interested in, the commission can remove projects that it doesn't foresee moving forward with, and just generally to discuss the merits of them, maybe to plan which one to do next, just to have kind of an open-ended discussion. There's not really a particular deliverable or outcome that needs to happen. It's really open-ended. So with that, I'll turn to the monthly updates. So again, looking first at the projects that were on the last quarter's policy prioritization plan. The first one is the review of the city's public financing system. This was a very large-scale program review and was conducted in 2 phases. The first phase is complete. The regulations and ordinance that emerged from that phase were passed and implemented, and those are done. And with the second phase, there's still one component that's still ongoing, which is the ordinance that the commission approved in May and which is now pending at the board. So the update for you at this point is that we did not get that ordinance called at a hearing or called at a committee hearing before the board went on its August recess. We were really hoping that we could because the goal is to have that ordinance be in effect for the 2020 elections. And given just the nature of the legislative process with multiple readings, hearing in committee and at the full board, and then having to go to the mayor's office, and then a 30-day lag time between it being approved and becoming operative, and then the implementation efforts that need to happen on our end, there is some time that needs to be set aside. So we're really trying to get this thing moving, get it approved so that we can do everything we need to do to have 2020 be under the new regime. So that being said, we're still working on getting the hearing date as soon as possible. The sponsor, Supervisor Marr, is the chair of the committee that this ordinance is in control of. So we're hoping that he will call it at the soonest possible time. I think that committee meets the first and third Thursdays, so I believe September 5th.
When is the board back from the summer recess?
I would say the first week of September.
Okay, so after Labor Day?
Yeah, right after Labor Day. So I believe if nothing out of the ordinary happens, September 5th should be the first meeting of that committee. So I will be in touch with their office, try and get that on the agenda for that meeting. Otherwise, I've been doing outreach to other members of the board, trying to kind of front load some of the legislative work so that we're not surprised when this actually does get called at committee that there may be members of the board who have amendments they'd like to make, trying to get those on the table now so we can plan, because if any amendments are made on the board side, it has to come back to the commission, obviously adding extra time.
And could you refresh us on the process? How many times does it have to be heard in committee before it goes to the full board? How many times does it have to be heard by the full board? And what are the different forks in the road in terms of approval versus amendment and timing?
Sure. So at committee, it only needs to be heard once. The committee can recommend it to the full board or pass it on with a positive recommendation with just one consideration of it. But when it gets to the board, there need to be 2 readings. So my experience has been, maybe Andrew can chime in, I think on the first reading, they usually will engage in maybe the more substantive discussion. Second reading is oftentimes same house, same call. They'll just call it, and whatever they did the first time, they'll do it again, at least with ordinances like this. With bigger, more controversial ones, I can't speak to, but that's been my experience with ethics legislation. So then from that point on, then it needs approval of the mayor, and then 30 days after the mayor's approval, it becomes operative. So piecing together all those different parts, you're looking at a months-long process. Having it called at committee, that's at the discretion of the chair of the committee, and having it called at the board, the president controls the agenda. So there's some wiggle room. It's not all set in stone when things happen. So there's a lot of contact that needs to happen, and that's definitely something that I'm engaged in very heavily.
And so to your point about meeting with legislative aides, with different supervisors in advance of this being called either at committee or to the full board, and addressing any proposed amendments, if the board amends the ordinance, it needs to be approved by a supermajority. Is that right? And then it would come back to us.
Right. So the commission will approve or must approve the version of the ordinance before the board does. So if the board amends it, the commission would need to consider it again, approve it again, and then the board would need to pass the version that the commission approved. So I'm hoping that we don't have to go
we don't have any amendments.
Yeah, through that process. But I'm not sure that will be the case. It's entirely likely that there will be an amendment. So we will have to see. It's hard to say at this point. So other than that, I don't have a lot of details really on that project. When it's outside of our process, we have a lot less control over it.
But there is an alternative with putting it on the ballot directly. It wouldn't be for this November, but there is an election in March of 2020, and that we could act to put it on the ballot if there's no movement, hypothetically, at the Board of Supervisors, that we could act to put it directly to the voters?
Yes, that's always an option legislatively to the commission. The commission does have the power to place legislation directly on the ballot, which is unique amongst commissions. I have not explored that for a couple of reasons. One is that it just doesn't really meet the implementation timeline that we're shooting for. I think even if it were approved on the March ballot, you have to wait for the results to be certified, and only then can we really in earnest start our implementation. We're really hoping that February will be the time that we can have this up and going. That's what we're shooting for. The reason is that in February, candidates can start submitting applications to qualify for the program. So in the perfect world, we would have the new regime in place when that application period starts. So that's one reason. The other is that we do have a sponsor. The sponsor appears enthusiastic about the legislation. Mr. Wright in Supervisor Marr's office has been talking to other supervisors' offices. So there does seem to be movement. It's not as though we can't get anyone to carry this over at the board. So I think at this point, there's definitely still a lot that can be done there. So that's why I also haven't looked at the ballot option.
I think you raise a great point about having it be implemented for the November 2020 election. I believe 6 of the 11 supervisors are up for re-election.
correct.
all the odd-numbered districts. So
Yes.
if they could benefit from participating in the program with higher amounts and different thresholds. So maybe that would help them speed up the process.
Absolutely. There are a lot of benefits even to incumbents, both incumbents and challengers of this new regime. And it would reduce their need to fundraise and spend their time doing call time instead of interacting with constituents. So I agree. I think there should be plenty of reasons for everybody to support this.
So at the next month's meeting, if you could report back on whether or not it's been heard at committee, that would be great. And we are here to do everything we can to assist to make sure that we can get the wheels of government to turn.
Yep, I will let you know. It may be helpful at some point to have you be, as chair, be active in the process. At this point, I don't think so, but it's possible in the future.
Happy to do that.
Okay, I will keep in touch on that. So the second project in the policy portfolio is the set of regulations that the commission approved in May. At this point, those are operative. The board took no action on them, so they became operative after 2 months. We've implemented them. They're on the website. We've updated our materials. So at this point, really policy's role on this is just like any other law, just to help other staff administer it, to answer any advice questions that come up. I don't really consider this to need any kind of policy attention in the strict meaning of policy as a policy project. So you'll see that this does not appear on the policy prioritization plan later on. And finally, the e-filing project for the Form 700. So again, this is to have all employees file the Form 700 electronically rather than just board and commission members, elected officials, and department heads, which is the current arrangement. So at this point, this is a big office-wide effort. My part of this is only one piece of the pie. I'm going to be focusing mostly on the bargaining unit negotiations that have to happen, and also with the regulation aspect of writing the regulation and bringing that before you. Other folks in the office, both on the EDA team and on engagement and compliance, are spearheading exploring the technology to make this possible and exploring the outreach and programs planning that has to happen in order to make it actually work. So it's a really big office-wide coordinated effort. And the update I have here is really just on my part, which is that I'm working with the Department of Human Resources to get them up to speed on what they need to know in order to lead their side of the employee bargaining unit negotiations. So that's usually something that DHR leads. They kind of facilitate it between the department that's enacting the new policy and the bargaining units whose members are affected. So they have to be up to speed on the project, and they usually will kind of guide our participation in that. So although I kind of represent our department in the process, they're kind of the main facilitators. So right now it's getting them up to speed and getting them to the point where they are ready to notice the bargaining units. So we're hoping that will happen soon, that a notice will go out asking, or rather notifying the bargaining units of the project, asking them if they would like to meet with us. So that is upcoming. Hopefully will happen towards the end of the summer.
And then just to be clear, this Form 700, the e-filing project, is not imposing a new filing requirement. It's simply converting paper to an electronic filing process. So it's still the same form, it's just a different method.
That's correct. Yeah, this project would not change the list of designated filers, people who are designated in the code as people who have to file the form. It does not affect that. We are deliberately not changing that. This changes the method, as Chair Chu described.
If I could just add just briefly
Yes.
for a little bit more context. So the method would be different, that the information would be provided electronically and submitted electronically.
Right.
Probably the most salient difference, of course, is that the information would be available online.
Mm-hmm.
So most of the paper Form 700 filers who currently submit their information to usually kind of a point person within their department would now have their information potentially online through the Ethics Commission website, I imagine, for more public, more accessible public viewing. And obviously, one other aspect of this potential project is that given that there will be more transparency over these Form 700s, some departments may want to revisit who they want to actually have file a Form 700s. In a sense, it's a bigger ask of those employees, so some departments may revisit that decision. And the commission should also know that every couple years, we always, as a city, revise the list of who needs to file a Form 700 as well. We do that every even numbered years, so this could easily dovetail with that project, as I'm sure Pat is very familiar with.
Exactly. And in fact, our plan here is to really keep them separate, but to keep the biennial code review front of mind. So if bargaining units or departments have concerns about who is filing a form or at what level of disclosure, not to say that we're not going to talk about it, but that we're going to talk about it in this parallel forum that will be discussed in the biennial code review in 2020, not in the e-filing project, that those should move ahead separately, but basically at the same time, because that process will start early next year of reaching out to departments.
And the implementation date, sort of the go live for all of the e-filing across the city then would be for for 2020, for April 1st, 2020?
It would be January 1, 2021.
2021, oh, okay.
Right, and it's January, not April, although you're correct that April is when the annual filings are due.
Yes.
We're shooting for a January 1 start date so that we can catch anyone who's filing in that time, because people do assume office. They have to file within 30 days of assuming office. So we thought January 1 is a better time to start it.
Okay, great. So we have more time, more runway.
Yeah. So we have all of 2020, but similar to the public financing program, and even more so, even after this change is created legally through the regulation, there's a lot of work that has to go on. A lot. Getting all of the departments to move in unison towards this new approach and getting computer systems, government computer systems, to work. So, but we're up to it. We're definitely on track to do it, and looking forward to bringing you more updates on that in the future.
Thank you.
So before moving on to the policy prioritization plan, there are just two other very quick updates here. One is on the Sunlight on Dark Money initiative. So again, this is the initiative sponsored by 5 supervisors, but led by Supervisor Marr, to create certain new disclaimer, contribution limit rules. That has now been signed a letter. It's Proposition F. And we worked with the Controller's Office during the ballot simplification committee process to provide a rough estimate on the budget impact that'll have in our department. As it turned out, their threshold for what constitutes budgetary impact is very high. It's probably a universal bar that's set across the city. So although we feel that it would be a significant budgetary impact on us, it was described as having minimal impact on government.
So just to be clear, we do not have anything in our budget for the current fiscal year to support the implementation of this initiative.
No.
And so we would have to absorb it somehow?
That's correct.
Or is there a process by which we can go back to the Board of Directors to seek additional funds to help offset some of these costs?
I don't want to speak for the director, but I would say that's probably something that would be part of next fiscal year's budget process. And there would not be a separate budget process specifically just for this ballot measure. I don't know if Director Pelham has anything to add on that. No? Okay. All right. Well, this is an unfunded mandate, so. But Proposition F, that's what it's called now.
So
Yep,
how
Commissioner
many unfunded mandates are we operating under so far? I mean, that one is pending, but I thought there were a couple.
Yeah, your question was about how many unfunded mandates the commission is operating under. The way I would define that term, I think probably all but 3 since I've been here. I mean, obviously there are projects that we asked for the Committee on Information Technology that have been funded. There was a ballot measure in 2016, I think, that had some funding with it. But generally, when we've had ordinances that we've asked for adoption by the board, some have had specific dollar amounts, but were not included. Others haven't. And so I think that's one of the things we should continue to present in our ordinances going forward about what the cost implications are. It is something, if it's not appropriated in the enabling legislation for the law, that we should certainly be tallying up and coming back to every budget cycle to remind everybody that it does take investment to make these rules happen in practice effectively.
And to that point, do we have funding in our public finance ordinance that's now being considered at the board? Or
No,
do we
that
need,
does not have an appropriation aspect to it.
would we need I mean, that's probably a separate question, but certainly something to think about as we go forward.
I had not included that really, only because we thought the main financial impact of that ordinance would be on the election campaign fund, how much money is being awarded to candidates, not so much the cost of administering it, which in theory should be roughly equivalent. This doesn't really change a lot of the language in the code in terms of how we administer the program. It really just kind of moves
Thresholds and
yeah,
amount.
thresholds and maximums and matching ratios. And I'm working with Rob Hodge, who's the person who administers that, and we're basically arriving at a system that will be able to accomplish that if and when the ordinance becomes operative. So I don't think it'll be something that'll require a really massive rollout.
Great, but as we go forward and consider future legislation, let's bear that in mind, the funding component, and make sure that we include, or a reminder to examine the appropriations aspect, so we don't, that we will have the funds, or ask for the funds, have the opportunity to ask for funds to support the work. And excuse me, it's an ongoing challenge with ballot measures that come to us for implementation without funds, but it's all part of life in the big city, I guess.
So I will skip the last update on here only because Rachel did such a thorough job of explaining our implementation efforts on the ACAO. This is just a note that I've been involved on that process, but you already are totally up to speed on that, so I will skip it. So moving on to the policy prioritization plan. So you'll see at the top, the first two boxes, numbered 1 and 2, are the two projects that have been ongoing and that I am recommending continue as ongoing projects. The Form 700 e-filing project, I think, is in the relatively early stages just because it's such a long-term and large-scale project. The public financing review project, probably in its later stages, but still a lot of work to go since there's an active ordinance before the board. Both of these are things that will take a lot of time from policy and I think are important to follow through on and devote that time. So at this point, I'm recommending just keeping those two as ongoing projects, not adding any additional projects at this time. But definitely like to hear any feedback, should you have any on that idea. And then also listing several projects here that are remaining kind of in the queue or the hopper of projects. These are projects that have been recommended at some point by a commissioner, and there was some degree of discussion on the commission, even if it was brief and informal. That's kind of what qualifies these to be on this list. This list is a little bit shorter than the last time the plan appeared on the agenda because I went through and removed any projects for which only one commissioner had supported, and that commissioner is no longer on the commission. So for any project that was the case for, that's gone now. So these should reflect, hopefully, projects that at least one member that's currently on the commission has discussed in open session. But again, this list completely up to change at any time, and that's part of what this quarterly discussion is about. So if there are things you think don't warrant consideration as a policy project, they can be removed. If there are things that you have in mind, we can add them. If you want to talk about the ones that are currently on here, about what they entail, maybe which ones are appropriate to do next, also good things to talk about. I can quickly go through the list and just give context for each of these. So a lot of them are program reviews, similar to the public financing program review. So that entails really looking head to toe at the program. So looking at the code, regs, advice, any other interpretive documents that we have to get a full picture of the law, and then also doing a complete project researching how we implement it. So looking at all of our compliance materials, all of our internal processes, any issues that have come up, any questions or concerns that regulated community folks have, a lot of times reaching out to stakeholders, whether they're regulated community or advocacy groups or other departments, anybody who could have a stake in these, really getting a full picture of the state of the world with that program and trying to identify ways to make it better. So the ones that are like that are the campaign consultant program review, lobbying code review, expenditure lobbying program review, which is kind of a subset of the lobbying program, but could be broken off as a separate project, conflict of interest code review, permit consultant review, and major developer program review. So all of those are different programs that our office operates, and those would all be kind of similar projects of looking at every facet of it and trying to identify ways to strengthen it. Policy projects on here that are a little different, these are kind of targeted or one-off ideas. So create a limit on contributions to IE committees. This is a very specific legislative recommendation that was made to the commission last year. It would essentially create a limit so that you could only give up to $5,000 to an independent expenditure committee. The only exception being if the contributor is essentially a committee that only accepts small contributions. So essentially trying to limit the flow of money into IE committees. So that project would be investigating all aspects of that proposal, whether it's feasible, whether it's a good idea policy-wise, whether it would expose the city to potential litigation risks, everything, and trying to inform you, and in the first stage, inform you as to all of those aspects, and then get feedback, and if you want to proceed with it, then proceeding with it. So that's what that project would be.
Mr. Ford,
yes?
there were some materials, were there not, that were prepared and distributed, I think, to the commission at that time. So since we have two new commissioners, could you please send them I think there's a proposal and a draft ordinance and a couple of court decisions?
Yes, I can do that. Yeah, there's
that will give a little more background on what this item is.
Good, thank you.
definitely. Yeah, there's a draft ordinance and there's a court injunction against a similar ordinance that was issued in the past. So I can circulate both of those. So the second to last project is exploring whether or not the commission should have independent legal counsel. So this proposition arose out of the concern that the city attorney's office provides advice about the campaign and governmental conduct code to both the commission and both the five-member commission and the staff and to the regulated community. So the idea here is that the commission should retain independent counsel so that separate bodies are giving legal advice to people who are subject to the laws and people who are enforcing the laws. And then finally, the slate mailer project. Slate mailers are subject to kind of a separate track of regulation under state law. And for whatever reason, state law requires slate mailer disclosures to be filed with the Department of Elections. They are not filed with us. So the idea has been floated that that shouldn't be the case, that people think of slate mailers as being akin to political committees, so their financial disclosures should be filed in the same place as all other election, or rather I should say political financial disclosures, which is with us. So this project would be scoping that out, seeing whether it's possible logistically, legally, if it's a good idea, et cetera.
Do you know, just off the top of your head, Mr. Ford, what the practices are in other jurisdictions, say LA or New York or Oakland, with regard to slate mailers?
I don't know out of state. In state, I'm fairly certain that other jurisdictions have the slate mailer disclosures going to the Department of Elections, only since state law requires that, but it's not something I've looked at, so I can't say for certain. So that's a quick overview of the projects. If you have any questions about them, I can answer that, but otherwise, we would leave it up to you to discuss these.
Question, and you may not know the answer to this, and I probably should, but don't. If there were separate counsel for the commission, are there provisions that would allow for a pro bono appointment of counsel, or would that have to be a paid position by a city employee? And if so, where would we get the money?
Right. I'm not aware of any kind of rule about paid versus pro bono legal help to departments. I don't know if Andrew's aware of one. I don't think one exists.
Okay.
But that's the budgetary aspect is definitely something that would be part of this project should you choose to pursue it.
All right.
And,
thank you.
Deputy City Attorney Shen, are there any agencies or commissions in the city that have their own counsel apart from the city attorney staff?
Sure. There are a couple. They're the exception rather than the rule. So the sheriff has, and this is provided for in the charter, she has her own legal counsel. And I guess in a sense, the tax collector has a tax collector attorney that works with the Bureau of Delinquent Revenue. So they work on this kind of collection matters that start in Superior Court or maybe federal bankruptcy court. But by and large, the city attorney's office does provide counsel to the vast majority of commissions and elected officials and department heads. And not to get too far ahead of the discussion, but I think as we've all communicated previously on this issue, such a change would require an amendment to the charter as well. Just so you know the lay of the land, the San Francisco charter currently designates the city attorney as a counsel to this commission. And so it would be something, ultimately, that would be up to the will of the voters.
Have there been any complaints from anyone about alleging a conflict about the city attorney acting as counsel to the commission? Has anybody raised it, either within the city or outside the city, as far as you know?
Only former commissioners, as far as I know, have complained about it. I'm not aware of external complaints.
So just from a practical standpoint, Mr. Ford, I think your plate is quite full at this time, and you're a team, a mighty team, but of one. And it doesn't appear that you'd be able to take on any other kind of significant policy initiative as outlined here. So what I would like to propose is the framework that I think about this would be, and I would ask my fellow commissioners as we continue to revisit this, I think on an upcoming meeting in a quarter or so, is that there's the next big policy initiative could focus on a core program area, as you laid out, whether it's lobbying or the permit consultant or major developer, and I think as the time comes, as we want to consider that, I'd like to have a little bit more information. You know, if you could present in a little more detail, kind of what it is, and like what are some of the, like what problem would we be trying to solve for if we were to tackle something like that. And then the second category would be this limitation on contributions to IE committees. I think that falls more in the category of like a impact litigation, you know, a test case that we would do to try and move the ball and stem the flow of money into independent expenditure committees, which is a different flavor from core program review. And then lastly, there's kind of the internal efficiency operation support for the ethics commission. So as we think about going forward, you know, what would be a priority? Because again, just like enforcement, we have limited resources, a team of one. How do we want to spend that time and energy on the work? And is it in core program areas, on impact litigation, or because the things that we do means that we're not doing something else. So I want us to be real thoughtful about that. So I would just ask that as you prepare for the next discussion, and if you could send around the materials for the proposed ordinance that is contemplated by the one on page 11, page 6, the limits on contributions to IE committees to all the commissioners, so they can review that and maybe tee up at the end of the year before, I think in our December meeting, I think is the next time that we will have this review on a quarterly basis, unless there's there is a desire now to identify something. I don't have a desire to identify anything in addition to what we've got going on right now, but at our next meeting, if you could provide a little more color background, if you will, on these, and then we can have a more robust discussion, and hopefully Commissioner Ambrose will be able to join us as well.
The next meeting is when?
I'm sorry, at the December meeting. And then our next meeting is in September. What is the date of our next meeting?
20th.
September 20th. So, Mr. Ford, I would like to get your opinion. Would a policy prioritization discussion and actually picking the next thing, because I hope by December we'll have more clarity around where we are with the public financing, where we are with the e-filing. Hopefully we'll have started the process to find someone to help you, and help will be on the horizon, and that we could have a discussion about what would be the next project to tackle. Is that, at this point, do you think that's the right timing?
I think December would be appropriate. December or perhaps January. I think we can talk as the time gets closer.
Okay.
But around that time, yes, we should have a lot more clarity as to the status of the public financing ordinance. Hopefully at that time it'll be on its way to becoming operative soon. Or if not, we'll at least kind of know what we need to do with it. And then with the Form 700 project, I'm hoping that at that time we will be in the midst of meet and confer, and I'll be able to tell you how close I think we are to concluding it and bringing a regulation before you. So I think, yes, like around the end of the calendar year would be a good time to look at this.
Terrific. Thank you. And if there's no other comment from commissioners, I'd like to call for public comment. Okay, for agenda item 12, there being none, we'll move on to agenda item 13, which is the discussion of Executive Director's report and update of various programmatic and operational highlights of Ethics Commission staff activities since the Commission's last monthly meeting.
Thank you, Commissioners. I have a brief report. One quick update that you have not heard about. You obviously know the budget has been passed and approved, so that is now something that we are operationalizing. And we'll be planning again for conversations to start in December. So we will keep you informed about how our current budget year is going, and obviously bring to you our best thinking about how to be effective in the coming year as well. For our audit program, I would just note that we've got 2 additional audits that have been completed and posted since our last commission meeting. So we have been receiving the ongoing support of an external auditor to assist us with the publicly financed candidates. They remain on track to complete those by the end of this calendar year. I'll keep you informed with more updates as that becomes available. I would also say that one operational note, along with the heat wave that seems to be blowing into town, we know that the campaign season is also blowing into town, and that is the tee-up of everybody go look at our website today. We have some new information that our staff has provided on data dashboards for the November 2019 election. So if you're interested in where the most money at this point is coming in and which committees are receiving the most money and spending the most money for the November 2019 election, our website is the place to look. We have new data dashboards that will help all of us and the public understand where that money's coming from and how it's being spent, and we can continue to monitor that through the election.
At the ethics website? The ethics website?
Yes, our Ethics Commission website, sfethics.org. And you'll see a new, what we call a banner on the homepage, and there'll be a direct link to the data dashboards that will be available for use. And again, we very much learn from and benefit from feedback that we receive from people who do visit the site and pose their questions to us. So we really look forward to getting feedback as we continue to provide information in the most useful way.
At the next meeting in September, could you have someone, I don't know if it's Pat or someone else from the team, do a little presentation for us? Because I thought when we did it previously, it was eye-opening. There was the sugary tax beverage initiative that was on the ballot, and when we saw millions of dollars coming in from North Carolina, it was shocking.
I think there'll be some Yeah, we'll definitely reach out with our electronic disclosure team and pull in all staff as useful. There is definitely some interesting information showing up already, so we would really encourage everybody to check out the website.
Yeah, because we have the District 5 race and
And
some very
attorney's
interesting ballot measures as well.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
That would be great.
And then just lastly, I did want to note, I have an attachment to this report. Summer is not a time off for a lot of people in our office. We've been very busy this month doing our annual performance and goal-setting process for the looking back at FY19, learning from that, and now also moving into setting goals specifically for each of us. So we've got our individual contribution aligning with the overarching goals that we have for the Commission's work in the coming year. So there has been a lot, from my experience, a lot of really, really valuable thought and conversation that's been going into that. So I very much have appreciated the staff's focus. It's a busy time always for us, but I think this is a very helpful and important way to be able to make sure we're having mindful conversations about our work and how we work together to serve the public. So that's something I just wanted to provide some insight for you about how we're going about that process, and generally happy to answer any questions you might have for me on these or other items.
Just in terms of open positions, I think there are 4 that are currently open, and do we have DHR resources to help us fill those positions?
Yes, we in this budget year, we have continuing memorandum of understanding to work with the Department of Human Resources. They're providing us a part-time, some hours for a senior personnel analyst. That equates to only about 14 hours a week, however. We were not able to get the full range of a contract that we had hoped to with our budget limitations. But we have very strong support within that time, and we are going to have to stagger our hiring processes because of that limitation of time and resource, but also our budget resources. So we're hoping that we will have a position posted probably within the next couple of weeks, and then we'll see more being posted after that. So we know that it's critical to get those seats filled.
Onwards and upwards. So hopefully, maybe we could use some of our salary savings to help put towards additional
hours. Yeah, we'll certainly explore that option. Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners? Public comment? No public comment. Agenda item 14, discussion and possible action on items for future meetings. Anything from commissioners? Public comment on this item? Okay, there being none, there's agenda item 15, additional opportunity for public comment on matters appearing or not appearing on the agenda pursuant to Ethics Commission Bylaws, Article 7, Section 2. Okay, there's no public comment. Move to adjourn. We're adjourned. Thank you all.